Lena Voss hit the ground face first, and the snow did not care. It swallowed her the way it swallowed everything out here. Quiet. Complete. The firewood she had been carrying scattered across the courtyard in 5 different directions, and her body just stopped, like a machine someone had finally unplugged after running it on fumes for 11 months straight. She did not get up. Inside the great hall of the Blackridge Pack estate, 200 wolves were eating roasted elk and pretending the world outside did not exist. The winter summit had drawn every alpha from the 6 northern territories, and the wine was expensive, and the laughter was loud, and nobody was thinking about the maid who had been sent to haul firewood from the eastern shed at 10 o'clock at night, because the kitchen furnace had burned through its supply 3 hours ahead of schedule. Nobody except Cole Ashbourne. Cole had stepped out onto the east balcony because the noise inside was making his wolf pace. 3 years of this. 3 years of his wolf clawing at the walls of his ribs, restless, and searching for something Cole refused to name out loud. His counsel called it instinct. They said his wolf was hunting for a Luna, a mate, the missing half that would settle the animal and steady the king. Cole called it a problem he would deal with later. He had borders to manage and alliances to maintain, and 6 territorial disputes that needed resolution before spring, and he did not have time to chase whatever ghost his wolf had decided to obsess over. Then he looked down. 3 floors below, in the courtyard lit by nothing but the cold blue wash of a winter moon, a figure in a gray servant's coat was walking through snow that came up past her knees. She was small. The stack of firewood in her arms was not. She moved like someone negotiating with gravity, each step a private argument between stubbornness and physics, and Cole watched without knowing why he was watching, without understanding why his wolf had gone suddenly, completely still. She made it 11 steps past the fountain. Then she dropped and Cole was off the balcony before his brain caught up with his legs. He did not take the stairs. 3 floors. He jumped, hit the ground in a roll, and crossed the courtyard in a dead sprint that kicked snow up behind him in white plumes. His wolf was not pacing anymore. His wolf was screaming. Not a growl, not a command, not the deep territorial rumble that made other wolves lower their eyes. This was something else entirely. A sound like cracking glass. A sound Cole had never heard from the animal inside him, and it terrified him more than anything he had faced in 31 years of living. He reached her in seconds. She was face down, arms splayed, her dark hair fanning out across the snow like ink spilled on paper. He turned her over, and her lips were blue, and her skin was the color of candle wax, and her pulse was so faint that he had to press 2 fingers against her throat and hold his breath just to feel it. Alive? Barely. He picked her up. She weighed nothing. That was the part that hit him somewhere behind his sternum, a sharp crack he did not have time to examine. She weighed nothing, and she had been carrying half a cord of firewood through knee-deep snow, and she weighed nothing. Cole carried her through the service entrance and bellowed for Owen, the head healer, in a voice that made 3 guards draw their weapons, before they realized the threat was not an enemy, but a girl who was turning blue in their alpha's arms. Owen came running. 2 junior healers followed. They cleared a table in the private medical quarters, and Cole laid her down and stepped back, and did not step far enough back for anyone to mistake this for casual concern. Owen worked fast. Vitals, warming stones, a compress of heated herbs against her chest. He checked her eyes, her breathing, her fingertips. Then he reached for her collar to check the pulse point at her neck, and he pulled the fabric down, and everything in the room changed. The mark was small, 3 inches, maybe less. A scar in the shape of a crescent, crossed with 2 vertical lines, sitting just below her left ear, silver white against her skin. It was not a wound. It was not a branding. It was a royal bloodline seal, bitten into the flesh at birth, a tradition so old that most wolves had forgotten it existed. Owen's hands stopped moving. The 2 junior healers looked at each other. One of them took a step backward, and the involuntary nature of that step said more than any words could have. Cole stared at the mark. His wolf had gone silent. Not calm, not settled, silent, the way the world goes silent before something enormous happens. He knew that seal. Every alpha who had studied the old histories knew that seal. 2 vertical lines through a crescent moon, the sigil of the Crimson Veil Pack. Crimson Veil had been destroyed 12 years ago. Every man, woman, and child. 400 wolves slaughtered in a single night. in what the official records called a rogue feral uprising. The territory had been salted and abandoned. The bloodline registry had been burned. The ruling council had sealed the investigation within 6 months, and nobody had asked questions, because the answers were the kind that got you killed. There were no survivors of the Crimson Veil. There were not supposed to be. Cole looked at the girl on the table. She was 23, maybe 24, which meant she had been 11 or 12 when the massacre happened. A child. A child who had somehow walked out of a burning territory and spent the next 12 years becoming invisible enough to scrub floors in the Alpha King's own house. Owen cleared his throat. His voice was careful in the way that voices get careful when the wrong word might start a war. My king. That mark is... I know what it is. She has been masking her scent. Wolfsbane compound, applied daily. Underneath it, her blood signature is... Owen paused. Swallowed. It is not Omega class, my king. It is not even standard Alpha. I have never seen readings like this. The density of the lineage markers is... Old blood, Cole said. Owen nodded once. Very old. Cole stood there for a long time. The heating stones hissed against her skin. Color was returning to her lips, slow and reluctant, like something being dragged back from a place it had already decided to stay. His wolf stirred. Not the frantic screaming of the courtyard, something quieter. Something that felt like recognition, like finding a door you had been walking past every day for years, and realizing it had been open the whole time. He pulled a chair to the side of the table and sat down. Wake me when she opens her eyes, he said. Nobody else enters this room. Nobody. Owen hesitated. The summit guests will ask questions. Your absence will be noticed. Let them notice. Owen left. The junior healers left. The guards positioned themselves outside the door, and the room went quiet, except for the hiss of the stones and the slow, thin sound of Lena Voss breathing. Cole did not sleep. He sat in that chair, and he watched her breathe, and his wolf pressed against his ribs, with a gentleness that the animal had never shown before, and the crack behind his sternum widened into something that felt dangerously close to a decision he was not ready to make. She had been in his house for 11 months. 11 months of walking past her in hallways, of stepping over her while she scrubbed the stone floors of the East Wing at 4 in the morning, of not seeing her because she had built her entire existence around not being seen. She was a ghost who did laundry, and hauled firewood, and ate after every wolf had been fed, and kept her collar high, and her head low, and her scent buried under layers of wolfsbane, so thick that even Cole's wolf, restless and searching, and desperate for something it could not name, had walked right past her without flinching. 11 months. His wolf had been searching for 3 years, clawing, pacing, tearing at him from the inside, and she had been right here, 2 floors below his bedroom, scrubbing his floors with hands that carried the blood of the oldest pack line on the continent. Cole leaned forward in his chair. He pressed his palms together. He stared at the seal on her neck. Somewhere in the great hall, 200 wolves were eating elk and laughing about politics. Somewhere in the East Wing, the kitchen furnace was still burning through its wood supply. Somewhere in the territories beyond Blackridge, the packs who had orchestrated the destruction of the Crimson Veil were sleeping soundly because they believed the job was finished. They were wrong. Cole sat in the quiet room and listened to Lena Voss breathe, and his wolf settled against his ribs like it had finally, after 3 years of searching, found the thing it had been looking for. And the thing was dying, and he was not going to let it. The hours passed like something heavy being dragged across stone. Cole did not move. The heating stones cooled and he replaced them himself, pulling fresh ones from the warming box in the corner, pressing them into the cloth wraps that Owen had arranged around her torso and legs. Her color improved in stages. The blue left her lips, the wax left her skin. Her breathing deepened from that thin, reluctant whisper into something that sounded more like sleep and less like surrender. At 3 in the morning, Sable appeared at the door. Sable was his beta, and she was the kind of wolf who treated trust like a currency she could not afford to spend. She had served Cole's father before him and Cole after that, and in all those years, she had never once told either of them what they wanted to hear. She told them what was true, and she let them deal with the discomfort of it, and that was why Cole kept her closer than anyone. She looked at the girl on the table. She looked at Cole in the chair. She did not ask any of the obvious questions. The summit delegates are talking, she said. Let them talk. They are not talking about your absence. They are talking about why 3 of your guards are posted outside a medical room that was not in use this morning. Sable stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Word moves fast, Cole. You know this. She collapsed in the courtyard. She is a member of my household staff. I am seeing to her care. Sable's expression did not change. It never did. She had a face like a closed book, written in a language only she could read. And right now, that face was saying something Cole did not want to hear. Owen spoke to me before he left, Sable said. He told me what is on her neck. Cole said nothing. If that mark is authentic, and Owen believes it is, then this girl is not a member of your household staff. She is the last surviving heir of a pack that was erased from the registry, and every alpha eating your food right now has a reason to want her dead. Silence. I am aware, Cole said. Sable studied him. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel like she was reading the small print on their soul, the parts they thought they had hidden well enough. Your wolf, she said. It was not a question. Cole met her eyes. Yes? Sable exhaled through her nose. A long, measured breath. She looked at Lena on the table, at the seal peeking above the edge of the collar that Owen had pulled aside, at the silver-white scar that represented the end of a bloodline and the beginning of a problem that could not be solved with politics or patience or power. Then we have a situation, she said. We have more than a situation. Sable nodded. She did not ask what he planned to do. She had known Cole long enough to understand that he did not make plans when his wolf was involved. He made choices, and then he survived the consequences. I will keep the room secure, she said, but she cannot stay here past morning. The healers talk, the guards talk. By sunrise, everyone in this estate will know that the Alpha King pulled a servant girl from the snow and carried her to his private quarters. She is in the medical wing. These are your private medical quarters, Cole. The distinction will be lost on the gossips. She was right. She was always right. Cole hated that about her, almost as much as he relied on it. Find me options, he said. Sable turned to leave. At the door she paused. Cole. Yes? If this is what I think it is, you cannot protect her and protect yourself at the same time. You understand that. He looked at the girl on the table. Her breathing had steadied. Her fingers twitched once against the blanket, a small movement that might have been a dream or might have been the first stirring of consciousness. I understand, he said. Sable left. Cole stayed. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the scattered firewood in the courtyard, erasing the shape of the place where Lena Voss had collapsed, smoothing the world into a blank white surface that looked clean and empty and new. But underneath the snow, the ground remembered everything. It always did. The cold just made it quiet for a while. It would not stay quiet for long. Lena opened her eyes to a ceiling she did not recognize, and a smell that made every nerve in her body fire at once. Pine, stone, leather, and underneath all of it, something warm and deep and dangerous, like standing too close to a fire that could either save your life or burn your house down. She knew what that smell was. She had spent 11 months learning every scent in the Blackridge estate so she could avoid the ones that mattered. And this one, this particular combination of authority and barely leashed power, belonged to only one wolf in the territory. She sat up too fast. The room swam. Heating stones pressed against her body through cloth wraps, and she was in a bed that was too soft and too clean and too far from the servants' quarters for anything good to be happening. Cole Ashbourne was sitting 6 feet away in a wooden chair turned backward, his arms folded across the top rail, watching her with the kind of stillness that only very dangerous people could maintain. He was not smiling. He was not frowning. He was just there, solid and present and immovable, like a wall that had learned how to breathe. Lena's first thought was run. Her second thought was that her collar had been pulled down. Her hand went to her neck. Her fingers found the scar, the raised edges of the crescent, and the 2 vertical lines, exposed and readable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. The room was empty except for the 2 of them, but the damage was already done. Someone had seen. Someone always saw. How long? She said. Her voice came out like gravel dragged across sandpaper. 8 hours. Cole did not move. You collapsed in the courtyard carrying firewood. Your core temperature had dropped to a level that Owen described as incompatible with continued breathing. You have been unconscious since I brought you inside. She processed this. The courtyard, the firewood, the cold that had been climbing up her legs all evening like something alive, something with fingers and patience. She remembered the sky tilting. She remembered the snow coming up to meet her face. Who saw the mark? She said. Cole studied her for a long moment. Owen, 2 junior healers, myself, 4 people. 4 people who now knew that the invisible maid who scrubbed floors and ate leftovers and never looked anyone in the eye was carrying the bloodline seal of a dead pack on her neck. Lena's mind went to work. 11 months of survival instinct kicked in like an engine that had never actually turned off, just idled, waiting for exactly this moment. She had contingency plans. 3 of them. An exit route through the east service tunnels. A cache of human currency hidden in a floor panel in her quarters. A set of civilian clothes wrapped in plastic behind the kitchen heating vents. She could be gone in 20 minutes. The mark is a branding, she said. From a trafficking ring I escaped when I was young. It has no pack significance. I am Omega class, packless, and I would like to return to my duties. The lie came out smooth and practiced, because it was smooth and practiced. She had rehearsed it in her head every single night for 12 years, lying in whatever temporary bed Aunt Helen had found for them that month, whispering the words into her pillow until they felt like truth. The mark is a branding. I am nobody. Please let me go back to being nobody. Cole listened to every word. His face did not change. His posture did not shift, but something behind his eyes moved. Something that looked like a door closing on an offer he had briefly considered accepting. Lena, he said. She flinched. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. She was on the household staff registry. But hearing the Alpha King say it, in this room, in this context, with her scar exposed and her cover blown, and 8 hours of unconsciousness between her and the last time she had been in control of her own situation, hearing him say her name felt like being seen in a way she had spent her entire adult life preventing. I have been Alpha King of Black Ridge for 7 years, Cole said. In that time, I have been lied to by diplomats, council members, rival alphas, and on one occasion, my own mother. I have developed a fairly reliable sense for when someone is telling me something they need me to believe rather than something that is true. He paused. That mark is not a trafficking brand. We both know what it is. Lena said nothing. Her hand was still on her neck. I am not going to force you to confirm it, Cole said, and I am not going to tell anyone what Owen found until you and I have had a conversation about what happens next. But I need you to understand that lying to me right now is not going to protect you. It is going to leave me making decisions without information, and that is dangerous for both of us. His voice was steady, not threatening, not gentle. Just steady, the way a bridge is steady, the way something built to hold weight sounds when you test it and find out it can. Lena sat in the bed with her hand on her scar, and her contingency plans lined up in her head like dominoes, waiting to be tipped. And she made a calculation that went against everything Aunt Helen had ever taught her. She stayed. What do you want to know? She said. Cole stood and crossed to a side table where a pot of tea had been sitting long enough to go cold. He poured 2 cups anyway and brought one to her. She took it because her hands needed something to hold. Everything, he said. But we will start with this. Are you the last one? It was not a question that needed context. She knew what he meant. Are you the last one? The last of them. The last branch of a tree that somebody burned to the ground 12 years ago. Yes, she said. Cole absorbed this the way a stone absorbs rain. No visible change on the surface. Everything happening underneath. Do you know why it happened? He asked. I know the official version. I am not asking about the official version. Lena looked at him over the rim of the cold tea. He was sitting again, same chair, same backward lean, same impossible stillness. She tried to read him the way she read every wolf she encountered, scanning for the angle, the agenda, the thing they wanted from her that they had not said out loud yet. But Cole Ashbourne's face was not performing anything. He was just looking at her and waiting, and the absence of performance was so disorienting that she almost started talking just to fill the space. She caught herself. Old habits. Aunt Helen's voice in her head. Never volunteer. Never explain. Give them the minimum and make them work for every inch. I know that it was not ferals, Lena said carefully. Ferals do not coordinate. Ferals do not arrive from 3 different directions at the same time. Ferals do not target the bloodline registry first. Cole's eyes narrowed. Not at her, at the information. She could see him filing it, cross-referencing it, against whatever he already knew or suspected, building a structure she could not see the shape of yet. The registry was targeted first, he repeated. It was the first building to burn. I saw it from the hill behind our house. My mother had put me in the crawl space under the kitchen floor. She told me to stay there until someone came for me. The someone who came was a woman named Helen. She was not family. She was a supply runner who had been making deliveries to our territory that week. She pulled me out through a drainage pipe that ran under the eastern wall, and we walked for 14 hours through the forest until we reached a human highway. She said all of this in a flat voice, the same way you might read a grocery list or give directions to a stranger. The flatness was not numbness, it was architecture. She had built a wall around this story a long time ago, and the wall was made of tone, of cadence, of the deliberate refusal to let any of the words connect to the images they represented. If she let the words become pictures, she would see the registry burning. She would see her mother's face through the slats of the crawl space. She would hear things she had spent 12 years learning how to unhear. So she kept her voice flat, and she held her cold tea, and she gave Cole Ashbourne the minimum. He did not push for more. That surprised her. Helen raised you, he said. In human cities, we moved every 18 months. She taught me to mask my scent, to suppress my shift, to walk through the world like someone who did not have a wolf inside her. She was very good at it. She had done it herself for most of her life. Where is Helen now? Lena's grip on the teacup tightened. A hairline fracture of something moved across her face and was gone before it had a name. She died 4 years ago. It was not wolves. It was not the packs. It was cancer, human and ordinary, and I sat in a hospital room and watched it happen, and there was nothing I could fight. The last 4 words hung in the air, with a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Nothing I could fight. She was a wolf. She was built for fighting. Her blood carried the markers of a lineage so dominant that it had once terrified every other pack on the continent into organizing a coordinated extermination, and she had sat in a hospital room, watching a disease she could not bite, or claw, or outrun, take the only person left in the world who knew her real name. Cole said nothing for a long time. He sat with the information the way he had sat with her unconscious body for 8 hours. Patient, present, not trying to fix it, or explain it, or make it smaller than it was. Why Blackridge? He asked. Lena almost laughed. It came out as a short, sharp exhale through her nose. Because it was the stupidest place I could think of. The Alpha King's own estate. Nobody looks for a ghost in the king's house. They look in the borders, the unclaimed territories, the human cities. They do not look in the place where the most powerful wolf in 6 territories eats breakfast. Cole's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something closer to the acknowledgement of a good chess move. You have been here for 11 months, he said. 11 months? 6 days? And in that time, has anyone else seen the mark? No. The wolfsbane suppresses my scent completely. I apply it every morning and every evening. The collar covers the seal. I work the early shifts when the hallways are empty. I eat after the staff because the kitchen is deserted then and no one watches me. She said it matter-of-factly, like a soldier describing a tactical position. But Cole heard the other thing inside it, the thing she was not saying, the loneliness. 11 months of being no one. 11 months of walking through a house full of wolves and being seen by none of them. Not invisible by misfortune, but invisible by design. And the difference between those two things was the difference between being lost and hiding was heavier because you carried the knowledge of what you were hiding from every single second. Sable knows, Cole said. She is my beta, Owen told her. Lena's body went rigid. Another person. Another crack in the wall she had spent over a decade building. Sable is the most trustworthy wolf I have ever known, Cole said. She will not speak of it. You cannot guarantee that. No, I cannot. But I can tell you that in 15 years of service, Sable has never once broken a confidence. Not to my father, not to me, not to anyone. Lena set the teacup down on the bedside table. Her hands were shaking, and she did not want him to see that, but she also suspected he had already noticed and was choosing not to mention it. What happens now? She asked. That depends on what you want. She stared at him. What she wanted. Nobody had asked her that in 4 years. Nobody had asked her that since Helen died. What she wanted was to go back to yesterday, when she was nobody, when she was safe in her invisibility, when the biggest problem in her life was hauling firewood through snow that was too deep and cold that was too sharp. What she wanted was to be the maid again, to scrub floors and eat leftovers and live inside the quiet, lonely shell she had built for herself, because that shell, for all its emptiness, had kept her alive. But the shell was cracked now. 4 people knew, and in her experience, 4 people was 4 too many, because secrets among wolves spread like blood in water, fast and directional, and impossible to take back. I want to stay, she said. I want to go back to my duties, and I want you to forget what you saw on my neck, and I want this to not have happened. Cole looked at her for a long time. I cannot do that, he said. Why? Because my wolf will not let me. The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Lena understood what he was saying. She understood it immediately, in the way that every wolf understood it, in the blood and the bone, in the part of her that she had spent 12 years suffocating with wolfsbane and silence. His wolf had recognized her, not as a threat, not as a curiosity, not as a political complication, as something else, the thing that wolves spend their whole lives searching for, the thing that his wolf had been clawing at him about for 3 years. She stood up from the bed. Her legs were unsteady. She gripped the edge of the mattress and forced herself upright, and looked at him with eyes that held 12 years of running, and 4 years of grief, and 11 months of deliberate nothingness, and she said the only thing she could think of that was true. That is not my problem. Cole nodded. I know. He stood. He moved to the door. He opened it, and paused with his hand on the frame. Sable will assign you to recovery duties in the private library. Light work. No courtyard shifts until Owen clears you. You will have meals brought to you, rather than eating in the kitchen. I do not need special treatment. You nearly died in my courtyard 8 hours ago because you were working a shift that should have been assigned to 2 people, and you were doing it alone in weather that would have dropped a full-blooded alpha. That is not special treatment. That is basic operational competence. He left before she could respond. Lena stood in the empty room with her hand on her neck and her cold tea on the table, and her contingency plans still lined up in her head, and she did not run. She did not know why. That was the most frightening part. The library was large and quiet, and smelled like old paper and dust, and the faintest trace of Cole's scent, as if he had spent enough hours in here over the years to leave a permanent mark on the air. Lena was assigned to shelving, cataloging, and light cleaning, all of which she could do with her eyes half closed, which left her brain free to run calculations she did not want to be running. 4 people knew. Sable was watching her with the kind of attention that felt like being X-rayed. Owen had been quiet since the night before, but Owen was a healer, and healers talked to each other in a professional language that technically counted as confidentiality, but practically functioned as gossip with better vocabulary. The 2 junior healers were the weakest links, young, nervous, prone to whispering. She gave it 72 hours before the information leaked. She gave herself 48 to decide what to do about it. On the second day, the thing she had been dreading happened, but it did not come from the healers. She was in the east corridor, carrying a stack of archived ledgers from the 3rd-floor storage to the library, when a hand closed around her wrist. The grip was not rough. It did not need to be. It communicated everything through pressure and positioning, the careful clasp of someone who wanted you to know they could hurt you without actually doing it yet. She turned. Alpha Victor Crane of the Ashfell Pack was standing 2 feet away, close enough that his scent overwhelmed the wolfsbane mask she had applied that morning, close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes and the thin smile on his face that had nothing to do with friendliness. He was one of the visiting summit delegates. Ashfell territory bordered the remains of the Crimson Vale lands to the south, and Victor Crane had been Alpha there for 9 years, which meant he had been a senior pack member during the massacre, which meant he knew exactly what the crescent and double lines meant, which meant when he leaned in and inhaled along the line of her neck, bypassing the wolfsbane with the kind of focused, deliberate scenting that only a trained tracker could manage, Lena felt every cell in her body go cold. His smile widened. "The dead do not walk, little ghost," he said. He released her wrist. He straightened his jacket. He walked away down the corridor without looking back, and his footsteps echoed on the stone like a countdown. Lena stood there, holding the ledgers. Her hands were not shaking. Her breathing was steady. Her face showed nothing at all. But inside, behind the wall she had built out of tone and cadence and 12 years of practiced blankness, something was cracking, and the sound it made was the same sound Cole's wolf had made in the courtyard when he found her in the snow. Glass. Breaking. That night, she went to the library at 2 in the morning, because sleep was not coming, and the walls of her small servant's room were too close and too thin, and every sound in the hallway outside sounded like Victor Crane's footsteps coming back. She did not read. She sat at a table with her hands pressed flat against the wood, palms down, fingers spread, like she was holding herself to the surface of the earth, like gravity had become optional, and the only thing keeping her from flying apart was the solid, physical fact of oak under her skin. She did not hear Cole come in. He was quiet for a man his size, quiet in the way that wolves who had survived real danger learned to be, the kind of quiet that was not about stealth, but about respect for the silence of others. He sat across from her. He picked up a book from the table, something thick and old, and probably about territorial law. He opened it. He began to read. He did not ask her what was wrong. He did not ask why she was sitting in his library at 2 in the morning, with her hands pressed flat against the table, and her eyes focused on a point approximately 6 inches in front of her face. He did not reach for her, or speak to her, or try to fill the space between them with words that would only have made it heavier. He sat across from her, and he read, and his presence was a wall, not the kind that blocks, the kind that holds. Lena's breathing steadied. It took 40 minutes. She did not count. But at some point, the air in her lungs stopped feeling like something she had to fight for, and started feeling like something her body remembered how to do on its own, and the table under her hands stopped being the only thing connecting her to the ground, and the library settled around them like a room that had been waiting for exactly these two people to sit in it at exactly this hour. She did not thank him. He did not expect thanks. They sat in the quiet together until the sky outside the windows turned from black to gray, and then Lena stood and went back to her room, and Cole stayed in his chair, and neither of them named what was happening between them. His wolf already had. Cole started digging the next morning, and the ground he dug into was 12 years old and rotten. He did not use his counsel. He did not use the official intelligence channels that reported to Sable, who reported to him, who reported to the Territorial Advisory Board. Those channels had filters and watchers and ears that belonged to wolves whose loyalty was to the system rather than to the truth. And the Crimson Veil massacre had been processed through that system and come out the other side as a clean, closed case that nobody was supposed to reopen. Instead, Cole used a network he had built quietly during his first 2 years as Alpha King, a handful of wolves scattered across the territories who owed him personal debts and answered to no pack structure. Runners, listeners. Wolves who lived between the lines of the map and knew where things were buried because they had watched the digging happen. The first report came back within a day, the second within 2. By the third day, Cole had a picture forming that made his stomach turn. The Crimson Veil Pack had been powerful, not in numbers. Their territory was modest, a forested valley in the eastern range that produced good timber and better hunting, but nothing that would make it a strategic target. Their power was in their blood. The Crimson Veil bloodline carried a genetic dominance trait that had been documented as far back as the founding of the territorial system, a trait so potent that any mating bond between a Crimson Veil wolf and another royal line would produce offspring whose biological claim to leadership would supersede every existing alpha hierarchy. Not political claim, biological, the kind of claim that other wolves felt in their bones, the kind that made them lower their eyes and submit without being told to, the kind that could not be argued with or legislated away because it lived in the blood itself. For centuries, the Crimson Veil had managed this by staying isolated. They did not seek alliances. They did not pursue mating bonds outside their own pack. They kept to their valley, they tended their forests, and they let the rest of the continent pretend they did not exist. Then, 12 years ago, something changed. Cole's runners could not tell him exactly what. A trade agreement, a border dispute, a young Crimson Veil wolf who had left the valley and crossed paths with the wrong alpha's son. The specifics were buried under so many layers of deliberate erasure that even the wolves who had been alive at the time could not separate what they had seen from what they had been told. What was clear was the response: 3 packs: Ashfell, Iron Ridge, and Hollow Creek. 3 alphas who had looked at the Crimson Veil bloodline and done a calculation that weighed 400 lives against their own continued authority and decided the math was acceptable. They had funded the attack. Cole's runner from the southern corridor had found financial records that should have been destroyed. Transfers routed through 3 different human banking systems to purchase weapons that ferals could not have obtained on their own. Silver-edged blades. Accelerant compounds designed for stone structures. Communication equipment that allowed coordination across a 15-mile assault perimeter. They had directed the attack. A wolf named Garrett Noel, a former Hollow Creek enforcer, who had been quietly exiled from his pack 2 years before the massacre, had led the ground operation. He was dead now, killed in a bar fight in a human city 3 years after the massacre, which was either coincidence or cleanup, and Cole did not believe in coincidence. They had targeted the bloodline registry first. This was the detail that Lena had given him, and his runners confirmed it. The registry building had burned before the residential quarters, before the Alpha's hall, before the nursery. The goal was not just to kill the wolves. It was to erase the proof that their bloodline had ever existed. No registry, no records, no evidence that the dominance trait was real. Future generations would have nothing to point to. The Crimson Veil would become a rumor, then a legend, then nothing. Except they had missed one. A girl in a crawlspace under a kitchen floor, pulled out by a supply runner named Helen, who had the presence of mind to choose a drainage pipe over a front door. One child, 11 years old, carrying in her blood the very thing that 3 packs had committed coordinated mass killing to eliminate. Cole sat in his study, with the report spread across his desk, and his hands flat on the surface, the same gesture Lena had made in the library, and he understood now why she did it. When the ground beneath you was made of bones, you pressed down harder just to feel something solid. His father had been Alpha King when the massacre happened. Cole had been 19, a year away from his challenge, already training to take the throne, but not yet sitting in the chair where the real information flowed. He remembered the night the news arrived, his father standing at the window of this same study, his face lit by the fire in the grate, and on that face, an expression that the 19-year-old Cole had not been able to read. He could read it now. It was guilt. Not the guilt of a man who had given the order, but the guilt of a man who had seen it coming and chosen not to prevent it. His father had known what the 3 packs were planning. Cole was certain of this now, certain in the way you become certain of things that have been sitting in the back of your mind for years, waiting for enough evidence to become undeniable. His father had known, and he had weighed the politics, and he had decided that a dead pack was a simpler problem than a living one. The old Alpha King had been dead for 6 years. Cole could not confront him, could not demand an explanation, could not look him in the eye and ask whether 400 lives had been an acceptable trade for political stability. All he could do was sit in the same study and stare at the same window and carry the weight of a decision he had not made but had inherited, the way sons always inherit the debts their fathers refuse to name. Sable found him at midnight. She entered without knocking, which meant she had been standing outside the door long enough to decide that what she had to say could not wait for permission. Owen ran a full bloodwork panel, she said. Without her knowledge, he used the samples from her initial treatment. Cole looked up, and Sable sat down across from him. She placed a folder on the desk. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was delivering information that was going to change the shape of everything. The careful blankness that was not emptiness, but control. Her lineage markers are not just old blood, Sable said. They are direct line. She is not a distant cousin or a minor branch. She is primary descent. If the Crimson Veil registry still existed, her name would be on the first page. Cole opened the folder. The bloodwork report was dense with numbers and classifications he could mostly read, but not fully interpret. What he could interpret was the summary line Owen had written at the bottom in his small, precise handwriting. Subject presents highest concentration of ancestral dominance markers recorded in modern pack history. Lineage integrity consistent with primary alpha descent of pre-territorial origin. Any bond pairing with a compatible royal bloodline would produce offspring of unprecedented biological authority. Cole read it twice. He closed the folder. She is not just a survivor, he said. No, Sable said. She is the reason they did it. She is the proof that the bloodline is real. And she is here, in your house, and your wolf has recognized her. The silence between them was the kind that fills rooms before storms, heavy and electric and waiting. The 3 packs, Cole said, Ashfell, Iron Ridge, and Hollow Creek. Victor Crane of Ashfell is in my house right now. He grabbed her wrist in the East Corridor 2 days ago. He scented her through the wolfsbane. He knows. Sable's jaw tightened. Then the clock is running. It has been running since I pulled her from the snow. What do you want to do? Cole stood. He walked to the window, the same window his father had stood at 12 years ago, wearing the face of a man who had chosen convenience over justice. Cole looked at his own reflection in the glass and saw something different. Not guilt, not calculation, something that felt more like a line being drawn in sand, a boundary that, once marked, could not be undrawn. I want to talk to her, he said. I want to tell her what I have found. And then I want to find out what she wants to do about it. And if what she wants to do about it is nothing, if she wants to disappear again, Cole turned from the window. Then I will let her. Sable studied him. She had known him since he was a child. She had watched him grow into the kind of alpha who led with precision and patience, and the careful management of power that kept 6 territories stable. She had never seen him look the way he looked right now, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to build a bridge or jump. You will not let her, Sable said quietly. Sable, you will not let her disappear, because your wolf will follow her, and where your wolf goes, you go, and where you go, the attention of every pack on this continent goes. She cannot be invisible anymore, Cole. Not because the secret is out, because of you. Cole said nothing, because Sable was right. She was always right, and he hated it almost as much as he relied on it, and the repetition of that thought made him realize how many times he had leaned on her steadiness to avoid confronting his own. He confronted it now. His wolf was not pacing, his wolf was not clawing. For the first time in 3 years, the animal inside him was still, completely, perfectly still. And the stillness was not peace. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when a predator has found its purpose and no longer needs to search. His wolf had chosen. The choice was not political. It was not strategic. It was not the kind of decision that could be argued before a council or negotiated across a treaty table. It was blood deep, bone deep, the kind of recognition that wolves had built their entire civilization around, and then spent centuries pretending they could overrule with politics. Cole could not overrule it. He was not sure he wanted to. Arrange a meeting, he said. Tomorrow, in the library. Private. Sable nodded and left. Cole went to the library the next morning and found Lena already there, shelving books in the eastern alcove with the quiet efficiency of someone who had made a career out of being useful enough to justify her presence, but not noticeable enough to attract attention. She was wearing the same gray servant's coat. Her collar was high. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like every other maid in the estate, which was the point, which was always the point, and Cole felt something twist in his chest at the thought of how much effort she put into making herself nothing. She saw him and stopped shelving. Her hands remained on the book she was holding, a thick volume of territorial law that she had been about to slide into a gap on the upper shelf. She did not put it down. She held it like a shield, or maybe like a weapon, something to occupy her hands, while the rest of her decided how to react. I found something, Cole said. Several things. I need to tell you, and I need you to hear it without running. Lena's grip on the book tightened. I do not run. You have been running for 12 years. The words were not cruel. They were factual, the way gravity is factual, the way the cold is factual. Lena looked at him, and for a brief moment the blankness she wore like armor cracked, and underneath it he saw exhaustion so deep it had become structural, the kind of tiredness that lives in the bones and cannot be fixed by sleep. Tell me, she said. He told her. Everything. The 3 packs, the funded ferals, the targeted registry, the financial records his runners had found, the genetic dominance trait, the calculation that had turned 400 people into an acceptable loss. He told her about his father, about the look on the old king's face that he had not understood at 19 and understood now. He told her about her own blood work, the primary descent, the unprecedented lineage markers. The reason, the real reason, why 3 alphas had decided that the Crimson Veil needed to die. Lena listened to all of it standing in the eastern alcove of the library, with a book of territorial law pressed against her chest. She did not interrupt, she did not cry. She did not sit down or look away, or do any of the things that people are supposed to do when they learn that the massacre of their entire family was not a tragedy, but a strategy. When he finished, she said, "I know." Cole blinked. "I have known since I was 9, she said. Helen told me when I was old enough to understand. She said I needed to know what I was hiding from, because you cannot hide from something if you do not understand its shape." She set the book down on the shelf. Her hands were steady. The steadiness was not calm. It was the steadiness of someone who has carried a weight so long that their muscles have permanently adapted to it, so that putting it down would actually feel stranger than continuing to hold it. Helen was not just a supply runner, Lena said. She was a Crimson Veil wolf who had left the territory 20 years before the massacre. She had her own reasons for leaving. She never told me what they were, but she knew what the bloodline meant. She knew what the other packs were afraid of, and she knew that if anyone found out I was alive, they would come for me, because I was the proof that their killing had not been thorough enough. She looked at Cole with an expression that he could not categorize. It was not anger, it was not fear. It was something older than both, something that lived in the place where a child watches her world burn, and then spends the next decade learning how to walk through the ashes without leaving footprints. "So I became no one," she said. "I masked my scent. I suppressed my wolf. I learned to walk through rooms without being seen, to eat without being noticed, to exist without taking up space. Helen taught me that invisibility was not cowardice, it was survival, and survival was the only revenge available to the last wolf standing." Cole thought about his father at the window. He thought about 400 wolves. He thought about a girl in a crawl space listening to the world burn above her head. "Survival is not revenge," he said. "No," Lena agreed. "It is not, but it is what I had." Cole crossed the room until he was standing 3 feet from her, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes that should not have been there at 23, the marks left not by age, but by the particular kind of living that wears you down from the inside out. "You have more now," he said. Lena looked at him. Her wolf, the wolf she had spent 12 years strangling into silence, stirred behind her ribs. She felt it like a hand pressed against a closed door, testing, questioning, asking if now, finally, after all this time, it was allowed to push through. She pushed it back. Habit, instinct, the reflex of a lifetime of suppression. "What are you offering me?" she said. "Protection, resources, access to the full scope of what I have found, and the choice of what to do with it. And what do you want in return?" Cole held her gaze. "Nothing." She almost laughed. Not quite. A sound that was the ghost of a laugh, the shape of it without the breath. "Nobody offers nothing," she said. "I am not offering nothing. I am offering everything, with no conditions. There is a difference." Lena studied him the way she had studied every wolf she had ever encountered, looking for the angle, the leverage, the hidden cost. She found something she had not expected. She found that he meant it. The realization did not comfort her. It terrified her, because a wolf who meant what he said, an alpha king, who offered everything with no conditions, was a wolf who was making decisions from a place she recognized, a place that lived below strategy, below politics, below the careful calculations that kept kingdoms running, a place that was blood and bone and the ancient, inarguable chemistry of wolf recognizing wolf. She could feel his wolf. She had been able to feel it since she woke up in the medical room, a presence like standing near a furnace, the heat of it reaching her through walls she had spent years building. Her wolf pressed against the door again, harder this time. "I need to think," she said. "Take the time you need." He turned to leave. At the door of the alcove, he stopped. "Lena, what?" Victor Crane left the estate this morning. He took his delegation with him. He did not say goodbye, and he did not file a formal departure with the summit registry. The information landed like a cold stone dropped into warm water. Victor Crane had scented her. Victor Crane knew what she was. And Victor Crane had left without following protocol, which meant he was not retreating. He was reporting. "How long do I have?" she asked. Cole looked at her with an expression that was not pity and not fear, and not the calculated calm of a king managing a crisis. It was something rawer than any of those things. It was the face of a wolf who had found the thing his animal had been searching for, and was watching the clock tick down toward the moment when the rest of the world would try to take it away. Not long, he said. He left. Lena stood in the alcove with the books rising around her on every side, towers of territorial law and pack history, and the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had once decided her entire bloodline was too dangerous to exist. She pressed her hands flat against the shelf, oak under her palms, solid, real. Her wolf pressed against the door a third time. This time, she did not push it back. The leak came faster than 72 hours. It took 48. A healer spoke to a guard during a shift change. The guard mentioned it to a kitchen worker over a shared cigarette behind the stables. The kitchen worker told her mate, who served on the outer perimeter patrol, and the patrol wolf told his unit captain during a routine briefing, and by the time the sun set on the second day after Cole's meeting with Lena in the library, the rumor had moved through the Blackridge Pack estate like fire through dry timber. The maid is Crimson Veil. The last one, the Alpha King, pulled her from the snow himself, and she has been sleeping in his private quarters. The last part was not true. Lena had been sleeping in her own room in the servants' wing, on the same narrow bed she had slept on for 11 months, staring at the same cracked ceiling, running the same contingency plans through her head, like a deck of cards she kept shuffling but never played. But rumors among wolves did not require accuracy. They required flavor, and the flavor of a king carrying a dying maid through the snow and tucking her into his own bed was too rich to resist. Cole found out about the leak from Sable, who found out about it from a kitchen worker who had the particular combination of loyalty and anxiety that made her report upward the moment she realized what she had overheard. Sable told Cole in his study at 7 in the morning. Cole listened, nodded once, and said, "How long before the council demands an audience?" "They are assembling in the Great Hall now," Sable said. "Of course they are." The Blackridge Pack Council consisted of 11 wolves, each representing a division of the pack's governance structure: territory, trade, defense, diplomacy, resource management, internal law, external relations, spiritual matters, youth development, medical oversight, and historical record. They were, in theory, an advisory body. In practice, they were a political organism with its own survival instincts, and those instincts were screaming. Cole entered the Great Hall at 8 o'clock. The 11 council members were seated around the long stone table that had served this purpose for 6 generations. Their faces were arranged in various configurations of concern, calculation, and barely concealed alarm. Derek Marsh, the head of external relations, was gripping the edge of the table. Ruth Kavanaugh, the eldest member, who oversaw historical record and spiritual matters, sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on a point approximately 3 feet to the left of Cole's head, which was how Ruth looked at people when she was deciding whether they had lost their minds. Cole sat at the head of the table. He did not speak first. He let them come to him. Derek broke first. He always did. "My king, we have received word of a matter of considerable sensitivity regarding a member of your household staff. Lena Voss," Cole said. "Former maid, currently assigned to library duties during medical recovery. The directness threw them. They had prepared for evasion, for political maneuvering, for the careful dance of language that allowed everyone in the room to pretend they were not talking about what they were talking about. Cole's willingness to name it stripped that dance away, and several council members shifted in their seats with the discomfort of wolves who had brought knives to a conversation and found the other party had simply opened the door. The mark on her neck," Derek continued, recovering. "Owen's assessment confirms it as a Crimson Veil bloodline seal. If this is accurate, and we have no reason to believe it is not, then we are harboring the last surviving member of a pack whose elimination was sanctioned by the Continental Authority 12 years ago." "It was not sanctioned," Cole said. "It was covered up. There is a difference." Silence. Ruth's eyes shifted from the point 3 feet left of Cole's head to Cole's actual face. The shift was subtle, but Cole noticed it, and what he saw in her expression was not the alarm the other council members were wearing. It was something closer to interest. Derek pressed on. "Regardless of the historical circumstances, the current reality is that we have a wolf of contested lineage within our territory, and 3 northern packs are aware of her presence. Victor Crane's departure without formal registry suggests he is already communicating with his allies. We are looking at a potential coalition response within days. I am aware. Then, my king, the council respectfully presents 3 options for your consideration. Cole listened as Derek laid them out. Option 1, surrender Lena to an inter-pack tribunal for investigation. Option 2, exile her from all pack territories. Option 3, publicly renounce any association and allow the involved packs to manage the situation independently. Each option was presented in the language of diplomacy, which meant each option was wrapped in enough procedural vocabulary to disguise its actual content. But Cole heard the actual content clearly, the way you hear a blade being drawn even when the hand drawing it is wearing a velvet glove. Option 1 was a death sentence in a suit. Option 2 was a death sentence in a coat. Option 3 was a death sentence that let everyone else do the work and Blackridge wash its hands. 3 doors, same room on the other side of each. Cole looked at each council member in turn. He took his time. He let the silence build until it was a physical thing, a pressure in the room that pressed against eardrums and spines, and the careful political masks that 11 wolves were wearing, with varying degrees of success. Then he stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His wolf surfaced, not a full shift, not the dramatic transformation that stories like to describe, but something subtler and more devastating. His eyes went gold. The air in the room thickened. Every wolf at the table felt it, the weight of a bloodline that had held this territory for 6 generations, pressing down on them like a hand on the back of their necks. She is under my protection, Cole said. Permanently. 6 words, each one placed with the precision of a stone being set into a wall. The room fractured. Derek's mouth opened and closed twice before producing sound. Ruth Kavanaugh's eyebrows rose a centimeter, which for Ruth was the equivalent of a standing ovation. 3 council members exchanged glances that communicated volumes of alarm without using a single word. The defense representative, a scarred wolf named Peter Hale, who had fought in 2 territorial wars and feared nothing that breathed, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest with an expression that might have been respect or might have been the face of a man watching someone walk off a cliff. Sable, standing behind Cole's chair, stared at the back of his head with a look that combined awe and something very close to fear. Not fear of Cole, but fear of what Cole had just set in motion. Because this was not politics. This was not the measured, strategic, 9 moves ahead leadership that had defined Cole's 7 years on the throne. This was one move, a single, irreversible declaration that drew a line across the entire continental power structure and dared every wolf on the other side to cross it. And the part that terrified Sable, the part that would spread through the pack like a second shockwave behind the first, was that Cole knew exactly what it would cost. He was not acting out of ignorance or impulse, or the blind heat of a wolf whose animal had overridden his mind. He was acting with full awareness, choosing this hill, choosing this girl, choosing to burn 7 years of careful diplomacy in 6 words, because the alternative was 3 doors that all led to the same room. The alternative was letting her die. The council session dissolved within minutes. Derek tried to register a formal objection, and was told by Ruth, of all people, that the Alpha's declaration of protection was within constitutional authority, and did not require council approval. The fact that Ruth, the oldest and most traditional member, had stepped in to confirm this rather than oppose it, sent a ripple through the room that Cole filed away for later examination. By noon, the visiting summit delegations began withdrawing. The Iron Ridge Alpha pulled his wolves out first, citing scheduling concerns that fooled no one. Hollow Creek followed within the hour. A message arrived from Victor Crane in Asheville territory, delivered by a runner who looked like he would rather have been anywhere else on the planet. The message contained one line: "You have chosen your war." Cole read it, folded it, and placed it in his desk drawer next to his father's old seal, the one the previous Alpha King had used to stamp documents that Cole now understood had been stamped over the bodies of 400 wolves. By evening, the pack was trembling, not in the dramatic, visible way that words suggested. Wolves did not shake or cower or run through the halls in panic. They trembled the way the ground trembles before a quake, a vibration you felt in your feet before you heard it in the air. Conversations stopped when Cole entered rooms. Guards stood straighter, kitchen staff worked faster, The entire pack organism had registered that its alpha had done something unprecedented, and the organism was recalibrating, adjusting, trying to figure out whether the man leading them had just saved them or condemned them. Lena found out at dusk. She had been in the library all day, aware that something was happening but not knowing what, feeling the shift in the estate's atmosphere, the way animals feel changes in barometric pressure, a wordless recognition that the weather had turned. When Sable came to find her, Lena read it on the beta's face before a single word was spoken. "What did he do?" Lena said. Sable told her. Lena stood among the bookshelves and listened, and with each sentence, the ground beneath her shifted. 11 months of invisibility, of carefully constructed nothingness, of being no one in the safest way she knew how, all of it erased in 6 words spoken by a man she had known for less than a week. She did not feel grateful. She did not feel saved. She felt furious. She found him in his study. She did not knock. She opened the door with enough force that it hit the wall behind it, and she walked in with a stride that had nothing in common with the quiet, downcast shuffle of the maid who had scrubbed his floors for 11 months. "You had no right," she said. Cole was standing at the window. He turned. His eyes were still faintly gold, the residue of the wolf he had let surface in the council chamber, and in the failing light of the evening, they glowed like embers in a face that was otherwise perfectly still. "You had no right to make me visible," Lena continued. "I have spent 12 years keeping myself alive by being no one, 12 years of wolfsbane and silence, and moving every 18 months, and eating after everyone else, and sleeping in rooms where nobody could hear me breathe. I did that. I built that. It was mine, and you walked into a room and tore it down in 6 words because your wolf told you to." Her voice was not shaking. It was sharp. It was the voice of someone who had learned that anger was a blade, and had spent a long time keeping it sheathed, and had just decided that this moment deserved the edge. Cole stood at the window and took it, all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He let her words hit him like stones, and he stood there and received them. When she finished, the silence was enormous. "You are right," he said. She had not expected that. Agreement was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for justification, for the kind of alpha reasoning that began with, "I had to," and ended with, "You will understand in time." She had not prepared for a king who stood at a window and told her she was right. "You had 12 years of safety built on invisibility," Cole said. "I dismantled it in an afternoon. I did it because the 3 alternatives were 3 versions of your death. I did it because my wolf will not let me sit in a room and choose a door that leads to you not existing anymore. And I did it because I watched you fall in the snow carrying firewood that should have been someone else's job, and I will not—" His voice cracked. Just once. A fracture so small that anyone else might have missed it. But Lena had spent 12 years listening for the tiny sounds that revealed what people were really saying underneath their words. And she heard it. "I will not watch that happen again," he finished. The silence after that crack held everything. It held 12 years of running and 4 years of grief and 11 months of deliberate nothingness, and 3 years of a wolf pacing behind a king's ribs, and one night in the snow, when a girl dropped and a man jumped 3 floors without thinking, and an animal inside him made a sound like breaking glass. Lena stood in his study and felt her wolf press against the door, hard, harder than it had ever pressed. The wolf that Helen had taught her to strangle, to suppress, to bury so deep that it became a whisper she could almost pretend was silence. That wolf was not whispering now. It was leaning against the door with its full weight, and the door was made of 12 years of practiced nothingness, and the nothingness was not strong enough anymore. She did not push it back. She stood in his study, and she let the anger drain out of her like water through a cracked cup, and what was left underneath the anger was not softness, and not forgiveness, and not the swooning gratitude that stories like to give their heroines at moments like this. What was left was recognition. She saw him, not the Alpha King, not the political figure, not the throne or the power, or the 6 territories that answered to his voice. She saw the man who had sat in a chair for 8 hours, watching a stranger breathe, because his wolf had made a sound he had never heard before. She saw the man who had walked into a library at 2 in the morning, and sat across from her, and read in silence until her breathing steadied. She saw the man who had just told 11 wolves and 6 territories, and the entire continental power structure, that they could come through him before they got to her. She saw Cole. And for the first time in 12 years, she let someone see her back. "I am going to need a bigger room," she said. It was not what either of them expected her to say. It was not romantic. It was not dramatic. It was practical, and the practicality of it broke something loose in Cole's chest that he had not realized was locked. He almost smiled. Not quite. The ghost of a thing. "That can be arranged," he said. Lena turned toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "Cole. Yes. If this goes wrong, if they come, if the war that Victor Crane promised lands on your doorstep because of me, I will not let you fight it alone. I did not survive 12 years to be someone's cause. I survived 12 years to be my own." She left. Cole stood at the window and watched the snow fall in the courtyard below, covering the same ground where she had collapsed 4 days ago. The snow was fresh and clean and new, and underneath it, the ground remembered everything. His wolf settled, not the frantic stillness of recognition, not the desperate certainty of a choice being made. Something quieter, something that felt like the space after a storm, when the air is clear and the light is sharp, and you can see for miles in every direction. She was not going to let him fight alone. Good. Because the war was already coming. The war did not come with teeth and claws. It came with paper and protocol, and the slow, deliberate constriction of a kingdom being choked from the outside in. Within a week of Cole's declaration, Blackridge's primary trade route through the northern pass was closed. Iron Ridge claimed a landslide had made the road impassable, a convenient geological event that somehow only affected wagons heading toward Blackridge territory. Hollow Creek pulled its timber contracts, citing reassessment of partnership terms in language so bureaucratic it took 3 lawyers to confirm that it meant they were cutting Blackridge off. Ashfell, the boldest of the 3, simply stopped responding to diplomatic communications altogether. Messages sent to Victor Crane's office came back unopened. The supply chain tightened. Food stores that should have lasted through the winter started looking thin by February. Medicine shipments were delayed. Construction materials for the Eastern Wall reinforcement, a project that had been approved 6 months ago, sat in an Iron Ridge warehouse growing dust. Cole managed it. He rerouted supply lines through the southern corridor. He negotiated emergency trade agreements with 2 smaller packs who had no stake in the Crimson Veil history and were happy to profit from Blackridge's temporary desperation. He reduced non-essential spending across the estate and redirected the savings into food reserves. He worked 18-hour days and held strategy meetings at midnight, and kept his council informed without letting them see how thin the margins were getting. Lena watched all of it. She had been moved to a room on the 2nd floor, 3 doors down from the library, in a wing that housed senior staff and visiting scholars. It was not the Alpha's quarters. It was not a political statement. It was a room with a window and a lock and a bed that was wide enough to sleep in without her elbows touching the walls. She had not asked for more. Cole had not offered it. What he had offered was access to the intelligence reports, to the strategic briefings, to the full scope of what was happening to his kingdom because of a choice he had made about her. She sat in on meetings. She read the supply chain analyses. She studied the diplomatic correspondence that arrived daily from packs she had never met. Wolves who knew her name now, who knew what she was, who were making calculations about her existence, the same way 3 packs had made calculations 12 years ago. She was not passive in these meetings. She asked questions that Cole's advisors did not expect. She identified patterns in the supply disruption that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. She pointed out that the timber contract cancellation from Hollow Creek had been filed on the same day as the Iron Ridge road closure, which meant the 3 packs were not reacting independently. They were operating from a shared playbook. Sable noticed. She did not comment, but she started including Lena in her morning intelligence briefings, and the inclusion was not charity. It was recognition that the girl who had spent 11 months scrubbing floors had been spending those 11 months listening, absorbing, mapping the pack's operations with the quiet intensity of someone who had learned that understanding the structure of a place was the first step in surviving it. On the 14th day after the declaration, the formal challenge arrived. It came from the Continental Council, the governing body that arbitrated disputes between packs and maintained the territorial system that had organized wolf civilization for 3 centuries. The challenge was signed by all three conspirator alphas and supported by 4 additional packs whose allegiance had been secured through a combination of political pressure and economic threat. It stated that Alpha King Cole Ashbourne of Blackridge had violated continental law by extending sovereign protection to a wolf of undocumented and potentially destabilizing lineage, and it requested that Cole appear before the council to either surrender the wolf in question or face formal review of his fitness to hold the throne. Cole read the document in his study. Lena was there, Sable was there, Derek Marsh was there, looking like a man who had swallowed something that was fighting its way back up. "This is an ultimatum," Derek said, wrapped in procedural language, but the substance is clear. "Surrender her or lose the throne." "I will not surrender her," Cole said. "Then you will face a fitness review. A fitness review has only been invoked 3 times in continental history. All 3 resulted in the removal of the sitting alpha. I am aware." Lena stood by the window. She had adopted Cole's habit of standing there when the thinking got heavy, as if the view of the courtyard and the snow and the open sky beyond provided something that the enclosed stone walls of the study could not. She was holding the document in her hands. She had read it twice. "I will go," she said. Every head in the room turned. "I will go to the Continental Council. Not as a prisoner, not as a refugee. I will present myself as the last surviving member of the Crimson Veil bloodline and invoke a tribunal of memory." Silence, the kind that rings. Derek looked confused. Sable looked like someone had pulled a pin on something. Cole looked at Lena with an expression that was very carefully controlled. The face of a man whose wolf was pressing against his ribs so hard he could feel the bruise forming. "A tribunal of memory," Ruth Kavanaugh said. Nobody had noticed Ruth enter the room. She was like that, 73 years old, and quieter than smoke, with a habit of appearing in doorways at moments when her presence would have the maximum impact. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, and looked at Lena with the same interest she had shown during the council session 2 weeks ago, the sharp-edged curiosity of a wolf who had spent her entire life studying the old laws and had just heard someone invoke one she had only ever read about. "The Tribunal of Memory is a pre-territorial right," Ruth said. "It compels the opening of sealed records. Any wolf of old blood can invoke it. It has not been used in over 200 years. "I know," Lena said. "Helen taught me." Ruth's eyebrows rose. That centimeter of motion again, the equivalent of a gasp from anyone else. "If the sealed records of the Crimson Veil investigation are opened," Lena continued, "they will show what Cole's runners already found. Coordinated funding, targeted attacks, 3 packs working together to eliminate a bloodline they considered a threat. The official investigation was sealed in 6 months because the evidence inside it would have convicted the wolves who ordered the sealing. You are proposing to walk into the Continental Council, the body that sealed those records, and force them to unseal their own cover-up," Derek said. "Yes. That is either the bravest or the most reckless thing I have ever heard." Lena looked at him. "I have been invisible for 12 years. I have masked my scent and suppressed my wolf and eaten after everyone else and slept in rooms where nobody could hear me breathe. I did it to survive. But survival is not living, and I am tired of not living." She turned to Cole. "You put yourself between me and the world. Now let me stand next to you and face it." Cole's wolf made a sound that was not the glass-cracking keen of the courtyard. It was something deeper, something that resonated in a frequency he felt in his teeth and his chest and the base of his skull. It was the sound a wolf makes when it recognizes not just a mate but an equal. "Together," he said. They traveled to the Continental Council seat in the Central Territory, a journey of 3 days through mountain passes that were being watched by wolves from at least 2 of the conspirator packs. Cole brought a security detail of 20. Sable ran point. Lena rode in the middle of the convoy, wearing her gray coat, her collar high, her scent still masked, the last time she would wear any of it. The council chamber was an ancient structure carved into the base of a granite mountain, older than any pack territory, older than the system it governed. 12 council members sat in a semicircle of stone seats that had been worn smooth by 3 centuries of wolves sitting in judgment. The gallery behind them was packed. Every major pack had sent representatives. The 3 conspirator alphas sat in the front row, and Victor Crane's eyes tracked Lena from the moment she entered the chamber, with the focused attention of a predator watching prey walk into a kill zone. But Lena was not prey. She walked to the center of the chamber floor. She stood on the stone circle that marked the speaker's position, a disc worn smooth by generations of wolves who had stood there to plead, to argue, to beg, to confess. She stood there, and she looked at 12 council members and a gallery full of wolves who represented the entire political structure of a civilization that had decided her family was too dangerous to exist. Then she dropped the mask. She reached up and pulled down her collar. She unpinned her hair. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, she stopped suppressing her wolf. The wolfsbane scent was the first thing to go. It evaporated like frost in sunlight, and underneath it, rising like a tide that had been held back by a dam that someone had just removed, her true scent filled the chamber. It hit the front row first. Victor Crane's face changed. The composed predator mask slipped, and underneath it was something raw and involuntary, something that looked like recognition crossed with fear. The wolf beside him, the alpha of Iron Ridge, took a sharp breath and gripped the armrest of his seat. The Hollow Creek alpha shifted backward a half-inch, a movement so small it might have been involuntary, but Lena saw it, and she understood what it meant. They could feel it, the old blood, the lineage that their predecessors had tried to burn out of existence. It was not aggression, it was not a command, it was presence, pure and absolute, the biological signature of a bloodline that predated the territorial system, that predated the council, that predated everything in this room except the stone itself. The eldest council member, a wolf named Margaret Price, who was 91 years old and had held her seat for 4 decades, did something that none of the other council members expected. She rose from her stone chair and dropped to one knee. It was not submission. It was recognition, the acknowledgement of something older than politics, older than law, older than the system that Margaret Price had spent her life serving. She knelt because her wolf told her to, and at 91, Margaret Price had learned that fighting your wolf was a game for the young. "I invoke the tribunal of memory," Lena said. Her voice carried through the chamber with a clarity that owed nothing to volume, and everything to the absolute stillness of every wolf in the room, as is my right under the old law, as the last surviving primary descendant of the Crimson Veil bloodline. I compel the opening of all sealed records pertaining to the destruction of my pack, my family, and my people. The old law could not be denied. Not to old blood, not in this chamber. Ruth Kavanaugh had confirmed it. Margaret Price's kneeling confirmed it. The law was older than the council, written into the foundation of wolf civilization, before territories or alphas or politics had existed, and it could not be overruled by any authority in the room. The records were opened. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of documents being brought from sealed vaults, of files being spread across the chamber floor, of financial records and communication logs, and operational directives being read aloud by a clerk, whose voice grew steadily more strained as the scope of what he was reading became clear. 3 packs, coordinated funding through human banking systems, silver-edged weapons purchased in bulk, accelerant compounds for stone structures, a 15-mile assault perimeter, communication equipment, a ground operation led by a former Hollow Creek enforcer named Garrett Noel, who had been quietly exiled 2 years before the attack and quietly killed 3 years after it. And names, signatures, direct orders, written in the handwriting of the 3 alphas who had sat in the front row of the gallery that morning, wearing the faces of wolves who had nothing to hide. Victor Crane stopped wearing that face around hour 4. By hour 5, his seat was empty. He had tried to leave the chamber and been stopped by council security at the door. He was sitting in an anteroom now, guarded, waiting, his political career and his freedom, and possibly his life, compressing into a space that got smaller with every document the clerk read aloud. The Iron Ridge Alpha broke at hour 5. He stood in the gallery and declared that he had acted under duress, that the original plan had been conceived by Ashfell and Hollow Creek, and that he had been coerced into participation through threats against his own pack. The statement was self-serving and possibly true, and ultimately irrelevant, because the documents showed his signature on the funding transfers regardless of how it got there. The Hollow Creek Alpha said nothing. He sat in his seat for all 6 hours and stared at the chamber floor with the expression of a man watching a building collapse in slow motion, knowing he was inside it, knowing there was no door. At the end of the 6th hour, the Continental Council issued its ruling. The 3 alphas were stripped of their titles. Their packs would be placed under temporary council governance pending new leadership elections. The sealed investigation was formally reopened and reclassified as a coordinated act of unlawful extermination, the most serious charge in continental law. The Crimson Vale territory, salted and abandoned for 12 years, was formally returned to its sole surviving heir. Lena stood on the speaker's stone and received the ruling with the same steadiness she had carried through 12 years of invisibility. She did not cry. She did not speak. She held the land deed they placed in her hands, and she looked at it for a long time. This piece of paper that represented a valley she had last seen burning, a home she had last felt through the slats of a crawl space, a world that had ended when she was 11 years old. Cole was standing at the edge of the chamber, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her, the way he had stood since the moment he made his choice. His wolf was quiet. The 3-year search was over. The glass cracking sound was gone. What remained was something that felt like the deep, low hum of a tuning fork that has finally found its matching note and can stop vibrating and simply ring. They left the Continental Council together. They traveled back to Blackridge together. They stood in the study together and looked at the land deed on the desk between them. "I do not want to be a queen," Lena said. "Then do not be one. I want to go home." "Then go." She looked at him. After everything. After the snow and the library and the 6 words and the council chamber and the 6 hours of sealed records being read aloud and the 3 alphas being stripped of their power and the land deeds sitting on the desk representing a place that existed now only in her memory and in the salted earth of a valley she had not seen in 12 years. After all of it, she looked at him. "You are not going to ask me to stay," she said. Cole's jaw worked. His wolf pressed against his ribs. Not the desperate press of an animal fighting for something. The steady press of an animal that had already found it and was simply waiting for the other half of the equation to arrive at the same answer. "I am going to ask you something harder," he said. "I am going to ask if I can come with you." The Crimson Vale territory had been salted and burned and abandoned for 12 years. The trees were coming back, the way trees always come back, slow and stubborn and indifferent to the intentions of the wolves who had tried to erase them. The valley floor was covered in new growth, scrubby and uneven, pushing through soil that still held the memory of fire. Lena walked the land on the first day. She walked it alone. She found the foundation of the registry building, a rectangle of blackened stone half buried in weeds. She found the drainage pipe she had crawled through at 11 years old, rusted and partially collapsed, but still there, still holding the shape of the night her world ended. She stood at the pipe for a long time. She pressed her hands against the rusted metal. It was cold and rough and real. Then she turned around and walked back to the temporary camp where Cole was unloading lumber from a wagon. He had his sleeves rolled up. He was carrying beams that weighed as much as she did, stacking them with the methodical precision of a man who understood that building something real required starting with the heaviest pieces. He was the alpha king of the most powerful pack on the continent. He carried firewood. Wolves came, not in a flood, in a trickle. Packless wolves who had heard what happened at the council. Exiled wolves who had been told they were nothing. Wolves who had been running their own versions of Lena's 12-year disappearance and had seen a woman stand in the center of the Continental Council chamber and drop every mask she had ever worn and thought, maybe there is a place where the masks are not required. They came, and Lena let them in. She did not demand loyalty oaths. She did not establish hierarchy. She opened the territory the way you open a door, with your hand and your intention and the simple act of stepping aside. The Crimson Veil grew. Not fast, not magically. Slowly, the way real things grow, with setbacks and disagreements and cold nights when the temporary shelters leaked and the food stores ran low, and Lena stood in the unfinished doorway of a half-built hall and wondered whether Helen would recognize what she was doing. She thought Helen would. She thought Helen would stand in this valley and look at the new growth pushing through the salted earth, and the wolves building walls, where walls had been burned, and the Alpha King hauling lumber in his shirt sleeves, and she would nod once, the way Helen nodded when something she had hoped for turned out to be true. Cole stayed. He split his time between Blackridge and the Crimson Vale, traveling between them with a frequency that made his council nervous and his wolf content. He did not try to lead the new pack. He did not insert himself into its structure or its decisions. He hauled lumber and dug foundations and carried firewood through the snow, and when Lena stood in an unfinished doorway looking at the valley, He stood beside her and said nothing, because sometimes the best thing a wall could do was hold. Spring came. The valley bloomed. Not the valley of 12 years ago, not the territory that Lena remembered from childhood, but something new, something that carried the memory of what had been destroyed, and the weight of what it had cost, and the stubborn, improbable fact of its own existence. Like the woman who had rebuilt it. On the first warm morning of spring, Lena walked to the eastern edge of the territory, where the drainage pipe sat rusted and collapsed in the new grass. She knelt beside it. She placed one hand on the metal. She closed her eyes. Her wolf was not behind a door anymore. Her wolf was here, present, breathing with her, seeing through her eyes, feeling the sun on her skin, and the grass under her knees, and the cold metal under her palm. 12 years of silence, ended. 12 years of suppression, released, not in a dramatic burst, in a quiet unfolding, like a hand that has been clenched for so long it has forgotten what it feels like to be open, slowly, carefully, one finger at a time, letting go. She opened her eyes. The valley stretched out before her, green and rough and alive. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Cole, coming from the construction site, sawdust on his shirt, a piece of lumber balanced on one shoulder. He stopped when he saw her kneeling by the pipe. He set the lumber down. He waited. Lena stood. She brushed the grass from her knees. She looked at him across the distance of 20 feet and 12 years, and a snowfall in a courtyard where she had once dropped carrying wood that should have been someone else's job. "I fell," she said. He nodded. "I am not going to fall again." He nodded again, and then he picked up the lumber and walked to the construction site and got back to work. Because that was what you did. You carried the heavy thing, you built the wall, you trusted that the woman walking beside you had survived worse than anything the future could hold. The snow was gone, the ground was warm, and underneath it, the roots held.